You wake to the smell of iron. Not rust, not old nails, but fresh blood, sharp and warm and thick in the back of your throat. You are lying on woven raffia mats, soaked from the night storm and something else more sinister. The ground is not shaking from thunder. It is from the footfalls of soldiers in red lamber cloaks, the earth pounding like a second heart. You crawl to the door of your village hut, but outside, the sky is veiled with smoke, and the shrieking is not the wind. It is the sound of thousands being herded, branded, mutilated. You do not yet know her name, but it rings in the mouths of the dying Ranavalona. You will hear that name in your nightmares. And when the rain stops, you will understand the truth. This is not war, this is purification. A queen is cleansing her kingdom with fire and flesh. What would drive a woman to slaughter half her nation? Before we journey into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, please consider liking this video and hitting that subscribe button for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the terror that would stain Madagascar red, we must begin in the highlands, where a girl watched a kingdom shift under her bare feet. She was not born with a crown, nor with the right to speak before nobles. Ranavalona entered this world in the late 18th century in the Merina Kingdom, a landlocked kingdom nestled in Madagascar's central highlands. Her father was a commoner, a man of no consequence in a world ruled by dynastic whispers and the distant pulse of French ambitions. Her fate might have been the same as any highland girl: marriage, childbirth, early death, but fate shattered when her father exposed a conspiracy against the ruling king Andrianam Poinimerina. For this act of loyalty, the king adopted Ranavalona into the royal household. But this was no fairy tale. The palace of Antananarivo, all towering wood and rattling hide drums, was less a home and more a crucible. The girl was stripped of her family, renamed and reshaped. She was taught not just etiquette, but paranoia, not just speech, but silence. In her silence, she watched how power devoured itself. The Merina court was a place of fragile masks. Kings smiled as they plotted executions. Queens wept over poisoned rivals. Ranavalona learnt the weight of eyes on her back. She watched consorts vie for affection with herbs and spells. She saw servant girls vanish in the night, only to be found with tongues removed, nailed beneath the ancestor stones. She was not beautiful, not in the way the court demanded. She was severe, sharp-eyed, long-limbed. Men said she looked like a falcon. She moved like one too. When the king died in the early 19th century, the throne passed to his son, Radama. Ranavalona became one of Radama's many wives. She did not bear children. She did not complain. She did not beg. She listened. She stored secrets the way others hoarded silver. Radama was not like his father. He welcomed European missionaries and treaties. He learned French and opened schools. The British sent Protestant Bibles. The French sent muskets. White men wandered the highlands, promising civilization, conversion, trade. Some saw him as a progressive monarch, but Ranavalona saw rot. She saw foreign cloth replace traditional lambas. She heard children whisper prayers not to Zanahary, the Malagasy god, but to the Christian Jesus. In the court's halls, she smelled foreign perfumes, masking colonial decay. Radama had made a choice to tether Madagascar to Europe, and though she was silent, her silence stiffened into resolve. When Radama died in 1828, chaos surged. He had no heirs. the nobles panicked. Others claimed rights to the throne. And then, like a knife slipping through silk, Ranavalona struck. With the help of loyal generals, she orchestrated a palace coup. Rivals were hanged or flayed. A concubine was buried alive for birthing a rumored royal son. She declared herself queen by ancestral right. The Marina elite were stunned. A woman had never ruled alone, but this woman did not rule. She dominated. And then came the system. Her reign was not one of simple tyranny. It was structured, calculated, bureaucratic brutality. She resurrected the traditional practice of tangina, a poison ordeal once reserved for justice, and weaponized it into state policy. Citizens accused of crimes were forced to eat 3 pieces of chicken skin and a poison-laced nut. If they vomited, they were innocent. If they died, their guilt was proof. Thousands choked on their innocence. She expanded the Fanampoana labor system, requiring citizens to give compulsory service to the state. Men hauled massive stone slabs to build roads and palaces, often barefoot, often under whiplashes. They died of exhaustion, dysentery, sunstroke. Their families were not compensated. Instead, they were taxed for the loss of labor. Christian converts were the first to fall. Ranavalona saw their faith as foreign treason. In 1835, she outlawed Christianity. Bibles were burned. Churches were razed. Converts were hunted. Some were hanged from trees by their hair. Others were flung from the cliffs of Ampa Marinana, their final cries swallowed by the valley below. But her violence was not erratic. It was a strategy. Every act was a thread in the fabric of absolute control. To Ranavalona, power was not inherited. It was claimed through fear and fed with blood. And still, she was adored by many. She reasserted traditional rights. She banished the white men who had begun carving up Africa. She said, "I do not want to change my religion, nor do I want to adopt yours. I will never cast off the customs of my ancestors." To her loyalists, she was a savior of Malagasy identity. To the rest, she was a beast in human form. Years passed, and the killing did not stop. But even as her kingdom burned and bled, survivors adapted. They did not vanish, they endured. Suffering under Ranavalona was not instantaneous. It was slow, like rot beneath the skin. You would not scream the first day. You would whisper. You would feel something tightening inside you, a kind of internal shrinking. You would dream of speaking the name of your God aloud, but your lips would not part, not because of fear, but because you no longer remembered how. Among the first to feel this unspoken erosion were the Malagasy Christians. Young converts, many no older than 15, had once read aloud from missionary-supplied Bibles beneath flame trees. Now they read only silence. Missionaries had been expelled. Catechists were seized. The Queen's spies, known as Empisikidae, shadowed every village gathering. A prayer could lead to torture. A hymn could cost a child their limbs. In the prison pits of Antananarivo, it was always damp. The clay walls wept from within. There were no beds, only coiled bodies stacked like tubers. Those caught practicing the outlawed faith were fed like animals. You had to eat with your hands tied behind your back. Your food, if you could call it that, was cassava paste mixed with ash or spoiled maize. And the smell. The prison did not smell like death. It smelled worse, like the patience of death. And yet, inside that dark, humans still tried to remain human. There was Rasalama, a girl of just 26, condemned for holding a small wooden cross. She had been captured praying in a field. When they dragged her through the capital, she did not scream. When they stripped her before the royal execution hill, She only asked to sing. Her final words were not recorded in ink, but in memory. My soul will go to God, for I am His. She was speared to death at dawn. Others tried to escape the noose through submission. They wore amulets and chanted ancestral prayers, pretending belief while hiding their crosses inside hollow gourds or sewn into their hair. Some converted back, at least outwardly. They performed Sorondra sacrifices, washing themselves in the blood of goats, hoping that if their bodies smelled right, their minds might be overlooked. But trauma was not just fear, it was the reshaping of the self. Survivors developed habits that were more animal than human. They learned not to flinch at screams. They learned how to sleep upright to avoid rats. Mothers taught their children how to cry silently, a kind of internal sob that sounded only in the throat. Some girls tattooed verses under their breasts, where only death would find them. And still, resistance pulsed in whispers. A man named Rainitovo, once a royal clerk, forged letters from foreign allies, trying to plead for intervention. He was caught. They cut off his fingers first, then his nose, then his eyes. They said he died a traitor, but before he lost speech, he said, "Better blind than to see this rain." Christian rebels from the Betsileo region attempted uprisings. Their messages were smuggled on banana leaves. Their meetings took place inside burnt-out granaries. But Ranavalona's network of informants was suffocating. She had agents among servants, among market vendors, among children. One betrayal could condemn entire families. And when betrayal came, it came like wildfire. In 1849, 26 Christians were bound and led to Ampamarinana Cliff, the sacred height from which traitors were cast. Below was not water, it was forest. Trees sharpened by wind and hunger. The condemned were offered a choice: spit on a Bible and chant devotion to the ancestors or fall. Some spat, most did not. They were pushed, one by one. There are no stones there now, only silence, and old trees twisted by wind. Meanwhile, in the villages beyond the capital, peasants bore the burden of Fanampoana. Men were conscripted to carry the Queen's messages across hundreds of miles without rest, barefoot through thorn scrub and malaria-choked rivers. They were forced to transport entire palace walls on their backs during construction of Ranavalona's new stone fortress, Manjakamiadana. The labourers called it the place where men vanish. Their backs broke, their heels split open. They were whipped if they bled too much. They were replaced if they died. To survive under Ranavalona, people learned not to live, but to disappear. You kept your head bowed. You ate quickly, silently, with no expression. You buried your family at night and told no one they were gone. You dreamed without sound. You raised children not to hope, but to obey. And yet, across the highlands, across the volcanic ridges and mist-soaked rice paddies, songs still hummed, old chants reworked into prayers, bamboo flutes carved into the shape of crosses. Rebellion became memory. Memory became ritual. People remembered Rasalama not as a girl, but as a saint. Children were told her story not to rebel, but to endure. But endurance has a limit. As Ranavalona aged, her violence did not recede, it deepened. She trusted no one. Her food was tasted by 3 slaves before she ate. Her bath water was boiled in her presence. Ministers who had once served faithfully were executed for imagined slights. One was accused of turning his back too slowly. Another was condemned for walking with too much pride. And even as she grew frail, her voice remained a weapon. She ordered entire villages relocated for failing to provide enough soldiers. When a famine struck in the southern provinces, she ordered the granaries locked. "Let them learn loyalty through hunger," she said. The queen's only son, Rakoto, began secretly plotting her removal. He wrote letters to the French, asking for asylum, support, anything. He called her a tyrant, a madwoman, a serpent in human form. But his letters were intercepted. The courier was tortured, boiled alive in oil, and flung to the dogs. Rakoto was spared, barely, but his silence after was complete. To understand the full terror of Ranavalona's legacy, we must descend into the final years of her reign. The long, cold twilight of a queen who believed she was chosen not to rule, but to purify a people through pain. Only when her voice began to tremble did people start to wonder if Ranavalona could die. Her final decade unfolded like a prolonged curse. The queen, now in her 60s, began to lose her grip, not just on her empire, but on her own mind. Her body weakened, but her suspicion only sharpened. She no longer trusted her closest advisors. She claimed her food tasted of betrayal. She ordered her water boiled 3 times and blessed by spirit mediums before sipping. Her guards doubled, then tripled. Every reflection in a polished surface became an enemy's eye. And yet her cruelty never dulled. She grew fascinated with new punishments. One method involved suspending prisoners by their arms until their joints dislocated. Another required sewing captives into live animal skins and leaving them beneath the sun until insects claimed them from within. These were not isolated incidents. These were court-sanctioned rituals. They were described in whispered chronicles by diplomats who survived their postings, sent back to Europe hollow-eyed and pale. The French consul, Jean Laborde, once favoured, was now kept under house arrest. He noted in his journal that the queen often wandered her palace at night, speaking to ancestral spirits, holding long conversations in an empty hallway lit only by animal fat candles. Servants said her voice changed during these visitations, growing deep, guttural, otherworldly. Whether madness or manipulation, no one dared interrupt her. Outside the palace, the island bled. By 1857, it is estimated that Madagascar's population had dropped by nearly 50% since Ranavalona seized power. Famine, execution, forced labour, and exile had carved a hole into the soul of the kingdom. The rice fields were still fertile, but fewer hands remained to harvest them. Forest paths, once crowded with traders and pilgrims, were now silent. Villages became smoke trails on the horizon, burned for disobedience or simply forgotten. And still, no one stopped her. It is tempting to ask why. Why not rise up? Why not strike her down? But you must understand, by then she was no longer just a ruler. She was a weather system. She was drought and thunder and inevitability. Her reign had lasted longer than many lives. Children grew into elders, never knowing a world without her. To imagine her gone was to imagine the sun vanishing from the sky. And yet, death did not fear her. In late summer of 1861, the queen fell ill. Her breath rattled, her skin lost its fire. She ordered the blood of 100 zebu cattle spilled in her honour, hoping the ancestors would be satisfied. But her sickness only deepened. Healers brought roots, priests chanted incantations. But nothing worked. She faded behind palace curtains, her body crumpling inward like old paper. When she died, the sound of drums did not stop for 9 days. Her corpse was wrapped in 7 layers of silk and buried in the sacred royal tomb at Ilifi, sealed with curses meant to strike down any who disturbed her rest. And what of the system? The moment she died, everything cracked open. Her son, Rakotono, crowned as Radamar II, traversed her policies. He reopened trade. He welcomed back missionaries. He outlawed Tangina trials. Within weeks, Bibles returned. Foreign ambassadors arrived with trembling smiles. Schools reopened. Converts emerged from hiding, blinking at the light. But there was no celebration. The kingdom was hollowed. Her ghost lingered not in the palace, but in the minds of the people. Survivors spoke of her in riddles. Songs were written not to mourn her, but to mourn what she had made of them. Some historians would later argue that Ranavalona saved Madagascar from colonial conquest for decades by rejecting European encroachment. They called her a nationalist, a protector. But we must be careful with that praise. What she preserved was not freedom, it was fear. The trauma she inflicted lasted generations. Oral histories in the Highlands still carry the echo of her name, spoken only in low tones. Children were told, "Do not shout. The Blood Queen hears loud voices." In markets, old women tapped 3 times on wood before uttering her title, as if calling her back by accident might still bring fire. And what of us? What do we make of a ruler who defended her people by devouring them? We must understand that history is not obligated to offer heroes. Sometimes it gives us mirrors instead. Ranavalona's reign reminds us how power, once absolute, becomes its own religion. It reminds us that oppression is not always foreign. Sometimes it grows from within, dressed in the skin of tradition, armed with the voice of a mother, a queen, a god. And it reminds us that trauma lingers longer than memory. Even now, as we examine her legacy, the question is not simply how many she killed, but what it means when survival itself becomes a form of worship. Her kingdom is gone. But the system she built, the silence she taught, the fear she engineered, they are not ancient relics. They are blueprints. We have seen echoes of her in regimes that crush dissent beneath patriotism, in laws that murder through procedure, in leaders who purge the future to resurrect a mythical past. So when you feel the instinct to look away, to call her monstrous and be done with it, remember, the Blood Queen did not act alone. She was built by a palace, sustained by a people, and watched in silence by the world.